we can take something which seems like a one-line story, actually. I mean, the story of this film can be said in 1 or 2 lines. But how do you create a whole universe around that? And how, through your cinematic expression, you can create that immersion and have many other meanings come out of it rather than just tell a story. Because I think that's the power of cinema.
This film, to me, seems very much about the scientist herself and the process that she goes through, more than it is about, say, moths, which is fascinating. And I think it's also kind of important because I've always gotten the feeling that most people, a lot of people at least, seem to think of the science as a body of knowledge rather than a process by which we can try to understand the natural world. And I feel like this film really brings us into, sort of invites the audience to experience this process firsthand. Can you talk a bit about how, first of all, is that, is my observation what you were intending? And can you talk a bit about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. First of all, I want to thank Maria, Luai, Film Independent. We were here exactly 2 years back at their residency, so it's just wonderful to come back and share the film. And I just saw the end of it here, and it's, I think, probably the best projection that's ever seen. So I was like, wow, it looks great. So thank you so much. And the seats are amazing. I should have come sooner. So having said that, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the film is about a lot of things, but definitely this was one of the intentions, is how do you make a film about science which is cinematic, which is true to the process, but which is not didactic. So definitely, and it is a firm belief that science can be something which is exciting, that's a lot of hard work, that's not too glamorous, and there was also a sense of, for me, which was very important, was the portrayal of a South Asian woman. Is like, because in this film, the way Mansi is portrayed, we don't actually know her backstory. So the film is not about her in a very typical, like, she's not the central character in that sense, because we don't know that much about her, you know. But can we see a woman in India, in the field, just doing her job passionately? I mean, is this an image of a woman of color that we can put out there? Despite, I mean, of course, there's violence. There are many things happening in the world and in our part of the world. But I am just so sick of this portrayal in which I don't want to see myself only as a victim. You know, I think there are other representations, and definitely we want to show Mansi as somebody who's just doing her job. And that's an inspiration in itself. And she's an incredible woman, of course. But that was very important for us to get across, in addition to the fact of what you're saying about science being about asking questions, about being curious about the process, rather than about some big discovery or a body of knowledge, as you put it. Absolutely, yeah.
What is your connection with Mansi? What was how did you encounter her and her story and the work that she's doing?
Right. So we didn't know anything about moths, or we didn't even know her from before. So we were doing our project on snow leopards in the Western Himalayas, and that was some commissioned work. And we just ran into her at a small restaurant where she was also doing something for the same project. And she was very unhappy. She was like, oh, this project is really mismanaged. And so she was not happy. And she was like, my real passion is moths. And she described this amazing forest in the Eastern Himalayas, where she had been working for many years already when we met her. And then when she described what she does, about how the moths come in hordes and populate this white screen when they put out the lights, it sounded like a very cinematic image to us as filmmakers. And that's what attracted us. And it was at that time, actually, just to backtrack a little bit before we met her, Anirban and I had been quite troubled by the direction in which our life was going, in the sense of being very stuck in our own homes with the AC on. We live in Delhi, which is one of the most polluted and crowded and noisy cities. And so we were just stuck to our devices. We were just on our computer all the time. Like I check my WhatsApp like every 2 minutes, literally. And it just this obsession with this sort of life which had absolutely no connection with nature. And we were like, we have lost something very precious, and we were trying to find that. And meeting Mansi and hearing her paint this image of this forest, where the light barely goes through the foliage, which is so thick, and then at night the moths coming, and we're like, oh my god, this sounds so amazing. And so that's sort of how these two thoughts came together, the cinematic and our inner need to connect with nature, which brought us to this.
Wow. I have to say that the film really did also invite me to question a lot of assumptions that I have about my place with respect to nature and with respect to the natural world. And it's marvelous that you created this sort of very open canvas that poses what I think of as like, you're sort of like half posing questions and inviting the audience to sort of complete the circle. I'm mixing metaphors here, but yeah. I'm curious a bit about the sound design. A lot of this obviously was sound you recorded
Yes.
while filming, and I'm curious about how you did that. And probably some of it, I would imagine, was done in post. Can you talk a bit about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we went to the forest for the first time, we heard so many sounds, and it was changing all the time. So like at 11 o'clock, the small birds would come, and it would be like a cacophony. They would be like, totally. And then within half an hour, they would all disappear. And then the crickets would take over. And so there was so many things happening. And then when the light changes, a night sets in, there's like night birds come, the night crickets. So there was so much going on with the sound. And when we recorded just with our normal microphones, we weren't getting all the layers that we were able to perceive with our ears. Because with our ears we can sometimes focus on one sound and sometimes another, whereas a microphone is just getting everything. So we were like, okay, we need to do a lot more to accurately sort of represent what we experienced there. So that was when the whole sort of R&D about which microphones, for which actually Anirban was much more involved than me with the sound part. So unfortunately he's not there with us today. He had to rush home, so he couldn't be here, but this would have been like sort of his ideal setting to see the film. So what we did was we had one 360-degree microphone, one 5.1 microphone, and then we had some clip-on mics on the sheet, so that even small minute movements of the insects on it can be captured. And then there were many directional microphones we used to get the flapping and so on. And after that we had 4 months of post in India, where our amazing Shreyank Nanjappa and Neetu worked very hard on cataloging hours and hours and hours of the sound that we had recorded on the field, and then did some preliminary sound design. And then we came to New York in the Sandbox studio, which is an Atmos studio, and Tom Paul worked there. Incredible experience of working in that studio and working with Tom in just isolating many of these sounds, like, again, it was all mixed up. And so how to isolate one frequency from the other, accentuate it for the right emotion at a particular point, or even to take the eye to a certain moth, so how to create your own little story within that same shot through sound. So that was a lot of work that we did in the post over 6 months. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, you did a masterful job.
Thank you. And also to think of sound design as music, actually, so that it's like you can just listen to the film with your eyes closed and it would still be quite nice.
Right. There's a lot of story just in the sound design.
Yeah.
And I was curious about the music score as well. It's a mostly ambient score, but it's a tonal score. And I heard what sounded very much like a metal flute and also a wood flute, and then a bazantar, sort of.
Yeah, there is a bazantar. That's right.
So can you talk a little bit about your use of music in the film? How did you choose where you wanted to have music and how it would function? And can you talk a bit about your process of working with a composer?
Yeah, so there were two thought processes. One was that the sounds of the forest was so incredible in itself that do we need music in this film? So I think that was a very fundamental question. And so for a while we were flip-flopping, but we felt like for some of the moments we needed that lift with which the music would give. So it was amazing working with Nainita and sort of not using, because of the nature of the film, we didn't use any electronic sounds at all. They're all instruments. And she also used the hang, I think, the hang drum.
Hang drum, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all very tactile.
Yeah. So and so we composed a lot more music than we actually used finally, because then we had to see how does the music interact with the sounds, and we didn't want it to be overpowering. So always the music sort of slowly creeps up on you. It never sort of dominates. It always starts very low, almost imperceptible, and then it sort of builds its own story, and then always interacting with the sound. I don't think we ever sort of just had music. It always had to interact with both the image and the sound, actually, especially like with the caterpillar, and so that there's a kind of playfulness in that. And yeah, we use the bazantar in the inner voice scene of Mansi when she's looking at the computer screen.
Yeah, I thought it was very effective.
Yeah, and in the end there was a music composed for the last scene, the last visual scene, which then we removed because then we just wanted the sounds of the moths. And then Shreyang did an incredible job with doing the designing of that and creating something which is not quite real, but which is a little bit disturbing, like to give a sense that there's life now, there's this thriving moths, but maybe not forever. So to give that kind of warning or that sense. So we didn't want to use music there. So we took away the music and then used it right at the end when the credits are rolling. So those were the choices we sort of made when we were mixing the film, is like when to use music very sparingly, but powerfully.
Yeah, it is interesting that music is sort of the one component in filmmaking that works against realism.
Yes.
Score is sort of the one.
It laid over in a way.
Yeah. I'm curious also about a lot of the shots seem to be sort of like a stationary shot. And can you talk a bit about those choices? And also we were chatting earlier about like the depth of field choices.
So we worked with this incredible camera person, Satya Rai Nagpal, who is so sensitive to light and framing. And so we really wanted to work with him. And in addition to that, he also has a background in entomology. So as a college student, he used to collect butterflies. So he had a special affinity for, Lepidoptera, of which moths also belong. So it was just amazing to have that kind of focus and love for the insect, actually, to bring to the table. And about the depth of field. So what we did was that we didn't want to isolate the human beings totally, So the whole philosophy of the film was, how do we cinematically represent that human beings are a part of this world, or this natural world, and that we are not only looking at human beings or only looking at human stories. And so through the lensing and through the depth of field, and so we were able to achieve that in the sense that we see people very small, or the car very small, and we see the whole landscape in focus. So we are not isolating the human presence. So that was a very conscious decision. And I forgot your first question, which was the one before the depth of field.
Just about how the shots, the stationary...
static shots, yeah. So we actually did a whole bunch of pans when we were shooting, and then our editor threw them all out, saying that it's all too labored, and look at this and look at that. And she was like, the beauty of your film is not that. It's like, hold on to the shots, and then let the eyes of the viewer go to different places. And and so I think we barely have like 1.5 pans in the whole film. So it's all, then the static shot has a kind of, it allows you to focus somehow, and also it allows your eyes to wander, because then, like you're saying, like then the viewer is free to make your own story within that image, rather than pointing too much to this or that. And even when the shots are the macro shots, it's like, you know, you actually see the scales on the moths and their antenna, and you and the eyes. And I love that shot of the eyes which comes in the end. I'm always like, the moth is like looking us in the eye and saying, what the hell are you people doing? I have all kind of meanings attached to that. But it's just, that just the time that it stays on screen allows each of us, I think, to make up our own story. And that also is something which has come from a long engagement and of being like a cinephile. And we are huge admirers of Abbas Kiarostami. And there is a kind of playfulness in the way he edits his films, in playfulness in the sense that there is this conversation with the audience, that you give some but not everything, and then you make up the rest of the story is made in the audience's head. And that's something that we've always aspired to, and we try to do in this film. Though, if you look at it, then none of his films have anything to do with anything in Nocturnes. But at a very deep and essential level, it has everything to do with it.
Wow. Can you give us a bit more information about Mansi? Like, does she have a university who's financing her work, or
yeah?
Funding
So this part of the work was done in the ISA lab in Pune, in Western India. Now she has a job as a professor, as an assistant professor in Bhopal, which is in central India. But she's very much doing all her field work in the same place. She set up a lab there. Ramana, her mentor, who you see briefly in the film, has handed over everything, what he was doing there, so handed it over to her. And so she has trained all these guys, who many of them we see in the film, and now they are doing the data analysis right there. So they have computers near the forest, they've been trained, and in fact she's in the forest right now. So because somebody wanted her to do a Q&A, and she was like, oh, I'm not available. I'm not available on Zoom because I'm in Arunachal Pradesh in the forest. Yeah. So she's very much involved with this.
And her field, is it quantitative ecology? What would you?
Yeah, I mean, I think her work is specifically on moths, because even just to understand moths in this particular location is going to take more than her lifetime. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is, in fact, she trained herself. She was not that good at math, but then she told us how she studied. She went back and studied high school level math because she had to do the programming to understand how the moth sizes are getting affected. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So definitely, yes. So yeah.
I'm very curious about the light. Mm-hmm. So like when you're filming, I imagine you have lights. And are there certain frequencies of light that the moths are more drawn to than others? And how were you able to film without the moths like being a problem?
Yeah, so actually the moths are attracted to the moonlight, which has and the UV part of it. So when we use the lamps, so the lamps that the scientists use they are UV lights basically. And in order to film, we had to accentuate that with some of our own lights without changing the frequency too much. So we did do that. We did that so that the blacks are black, and that the images look good and their work is not affected. So we did use our own lights, but just above their lights. And that was, you're right, that they are attracted more to the UV spectrum, the ultraviolet spectrum.
Very cool. Yeah. And moths are a genus, right? And there's different species. Pardon my ignorance. There are different species.
No, I mean, in fact, hawk moths are a family.
Okay.
So I think, I don't know where the genus comes in, and Lepidoptera have, I think that's an order, I think, if I know my biology right. Yeah. And moths and butterflies both are part of it. And there are 150,000 species of moths and maybe 18,000 of butterflies. So, and we didn't know that because they always operate at night. And so we are so fascinated by butterflies, but actually moths are way, way more in number and species. Yeah.
Can you, I'm very curious about your background as a filmmaker. I know you have a background in math and then you went into filmmaking. Very curious about that path.
Well, I always wanted to be a filmmaker, but I come from a family of scientists and engineers. So it was a bit difficult for me to say that I want to be a filmmaker. So I did my degree in math, but I love math, having said that. But I never wanted to do anything with math. You know, I just did it because I like it. But it was just sort of this thing. But so science, I actually never liked that much. So in a way, this film was also, I think, we were very careful that not to overload it with information, because I was like, I don't want to be in a science class, you know. So, but I still wanted to show that science is something that can be interesting. It was almost like a what do you say, like with a vengeance against my science teachers, because I was like, there's a way to teach science and make it more interesting. And I should have liked science at school, but I didn't, you know. So it's like, how can you present science in a way that's engaging? So I thought that was
Well, you did it.
yeah, thank you. So cinema was sort of the medium for that, because that's a medium I love. And I'm like, can I bring something which I don't like that much and make something that, you know, that makes you understand science better? So, you know, and makes you appreciate scientists' work better. So definitely that. So your observation was bang on about that. Thank you.
Is there something you're working on next or now that you're excited about that you can talk about?
Yeah, there is something which is sort of Nocturnes turned on its head, and that's all I'm going to say. So it's something to do with insects, but yeah, it's still too early. It's like in development right now, but yeah, but it's an idea that I think there's so much more to do, and we were so fascinated making this film, and it was such a learning experience of knowing ourselves and our creative process, and it was just so much fun that, and it also gave us the confidence that we can take something which seems like a one-line story, actually. I mean, the story of this film can be said in 1 or 2 lines, if there is a story, but how do you create a whole universe around that? And how, through your cinematic expression, you can create that immersion and have many other meanings come out of it rather than just tell a story. Because I think that's the power of cinema. And so I think with this film especially, we got that confidence that, okay, it's possible, we can do it. And so we can push the limits even further with the next one, hopefully.
And this film is currently touring the festival circuit, or where are you?
Yeah, it's been touring since January. We premiered at Sundance, and it's been shown at over 40 festivals. And now it's released, well, it released in New York last weekend, this weekend in LA. That's why I'm here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's been our dream, because we see this as a big screen experience, and it's just such an honor to that, you know, Grasshopper Film picked it up, and so now it's getting released in the US, but not in our country because documentaries don't get released there, and nor do a lot of indie films. So
will audiences be able to stream it and at least have like, will it be, do you know, will it be streamed in?
It hasn't been bought yet, so if somebody
Okay.
buys it, then yeah, sure. Yeah, but we really want people to experience it in the theaters. So festivals have been great, release has been great, but you know, but it's a challenging world out there to release documentaries in other countries for sure. Yeah. So
Well, thank you.
yeah,
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.